I always knew my neighborhood had its quirks, but nothing prepared me for what unfolded when a power-hungry HOA Karen decided to cross the wrong line by cutting the lock off my Jeep and towing it without even knowing what she was getting into. You see, this wasn't just any Jeep. It belonged to a police task force, and the moment she touched it, she triggered a chain of events that would flip her world upside down. But let me back up a bit. My name's Ryan. I'm a 33-year old former Marine turned investigator. After years of working undercover operations with a federal task force, I was finally granted some peace and quiet in a nice, quiet suburb. I bought a cozy little home at the end of Willow Creek Lane. Nothing too flashy, just a modest two-story with a wraparound porch and an old oak tree in the front yard. The kind of place you settle down in. Retire your nerves, breathe easy for once, but neighborhoods like this, they always have someone like Karen. She's the kind of woman who considers herself royalty because she chairs the HOA board. She drives a white Lexus that she parks diagonally just to show dominance. Her hair's always pulled back too tight. Her lips are permanently pursed like she's tasting something sour, and her favorite pastime, policing other people's lives. At first, it was just small things. Notes on my trash can placement, emails about the color of my mailbox. She even once cited me for having overly aggressive grass. I brushed it off. I dealt with worse in Kandahar, but I made a mental note. Karen liked control, and she didn't take well to people who didn't submit. Now about that Jeep, it's not flashy, but it's tactical. Matte black, reinforced chassis, secure compartments, encrypted communications. It's registered under a dummy civilian name for safety reasons, and while it's technically mine to use, it's property of the department. That Jeep's been involved in everything from surveillance to sting operations, and because of the sensitive tech on board, it's not something you just tow on a whim. One morning, I walked out to leave for a classified pickup. I turned the corner, and my Jeep was gone. At first, I thought maybe it was moved by one of the task force guys, but a quick call confirmed they hadn't touched it. Then I noticed the bolt cutters on the ground. Rusty dropped in a rush. My reinforced lock had been sliced clean through. Someone had taken it, someone without a clue. I checked my porch cam footage, and there she was, Karen, in broad daylight, waddling up to my driveway with two tow truck guys, pointing at my Jeep like she was declaring war. She yelled something about violating HOA parking rules, and waved a piece of paper that looked more like a grocery list than any legal notice. The tow truck driver hesitated. He knew better. You could see it in his eyes. He kept pointing to the tinted windows, probably noticing the police-grade reinforcement, but Karen insisted. She screamed. She threatened to have the company fined if they didn't tow it immediately. So they did, and she smiled, smug and proud, like she'd just defeated a dragon. Little did she know she'd just poked a sleeping bear. I immediately filed an incident report. Within hours, it was escalated through my chain of command. Not only had she trespassed on private property, she had interfered with a federal vehicle in active duty. That alone carried serious consequences: tampering with evidence, obstruction, unauthorized impoundment of law enforcement equipment. The legal team wanted blood, but I knew I needed to be tactical. Karen wasn't just a nuisance anymore. She was a liability, and liabilities needed to be exposed, so I let her feel safe for a while. I didn't confront her directly. Instead, I let her go about her usual business, sipping iced lattes, holding HOA meetings, in her sunroom, sending out more of her useless newsletters. But in the background, I worked with my team. We traced the tow yard, recovered the vehicle, logged every detail from the chain of custody, and when the tech team swept it, we found signs of tampering. One of the side compartments had been popped open. That's when things got serious. Because Karen hadn't just towed a Jeep, she'd potentially breached an ongoing federal case, and while she may have thought she was untouchable in her little suburban throne, she was about to find out how fast the world could flip. I still remember the look on her face the next week when a pair of federal agents knocked on her door. It wasn't anger, it wasn't confusion, it was the first flicker of fear I'd ever seen in her eyes. And that was just the beginning. The moment those federal agents knocked on Karen's door, the mask she wore in the neighborhood began to crack. No more tight-lipped smiles. No more folded arms or self-important glances from her Lexus. Instead, there was panic raw and visible, but the real show began 2 hours later when she was escorted to the sidewalk, in full view of the neighbors, while agents entered her house with a warrant. You could hear the gasps from 2 blocks away. Curious residents peeked out from behind curtains, some stepped onto their porches pretending to sweep, and a few openly filmed with their phones. Karen, queen of the HOA, was no longer in control, and she knew it. The federal team wasn't just there for show. They had a list, detailed and precise. Their objective wasn't just to rattle her. It was to retrieve every piece of information she had touched after the Jeep was taken. They needed to know, had she opened compartments? Did she photograph anything? Did she take anything out? Karen kept denying, waving her arms dramatically like it was all a misunderstanding. She kept yelling that she was just enforcing neighborhood rules, that she didn't know it was a government vehicle, and that she had every right to remove a car that had violated parking restrictions. But the agents didn't care about HOA regulations. They cared about breach of federal property. After hours of searching, they left with her phone, laptop, and security footage from her home cameras. She was told she'd be contacted soon for further questioning. But the moment they left, Karen made the worst decision of her life. She called an emergency HOA meeting. She wanted to spin the narrative before it could spread too far. That evening, we all got a hand-delivered invite to discuss recent neighborhood events and clarify misinformation. A typical Karen move: turn accountability into a spectacle. I showed up, of course, sat right in the front row with a neutral expression and a steaming cup of coffee. She didn't dare make eye contact with me. The meeting started off as expected, Karen pacing in front of her living room like she was addressing the nation. She claimed the situation was deeply exaggerated, that the vehicle in question appeared abandoned, and that the tow was necessary for neighborhood aesthetics. I nearly choked on my coffee. Abandoned. A federal-issue Jeep with encrypted plates, surveillance mods, and reinforced doors. But I stayed quiet. I wanted her to dig her own hole, and dig she did. A few neighbors began asking questions. Why didn't she notify the owner before towing it? Why didn't she call the police first? And how come she ignored the obvious markings on the dashboard? One's clearly labeled for law enforcement use. She stumbled, blamed the tow company, blamed vague policies, even blamed untrustworthy newcomers to the neighborhood. That's when I stood up. I calmly explained who I was, my background, my role in the task force, and the fact that the Jeep had been parked there for a specific reason, because I had classified work to attend to in the area. The room fell dead silent. You could feel her power slipping through her fingers like sand. I didn't shout, didn't accuse. I simply let them know the severity of what had occurred, and that it was now a matter between her and the federal government. Then I walked out. The fallout was instant. Neighbors who once nodded politely to her began avoiding her altogether. Some started demanding a full audit of HOA activities. Others called for her resignation. But the real storm came when she received the official federal notice. A court summons for unlawful tampering, trespassing on federal assets, and obstruction of an active investigation. The penalties were severe: fines, potential jail time, and permanent restrictions from serving on any board governing public or shared property. Karen panicked. She hired a lawyer, tried to issue apologies through HOA emails, even offered to host a neighborhood reconciliation barbecue. No one showed up. Her reputation was shattered, and the funniest part, the very thing she used to control others, her authority, became the reason she lost everything. A week later, I found a manila envelope on my doorstep. No return address, but inside was a handwritten letter from Karen. She didn't sign her name, but I recognized the penmanship immediately. The letter was rambling, apologetic, and filled with excuses. She claimed she was under pressure, that she never meant harm, and that maybe people like me don't belong in quiet neighborhoods like this anyway. That last line stuck with me. Even in shame, she couldn't help but blame. But what she didn't realize was that this neighborhood had already changed, and people were waking up. Her final mistake was believing no one would stand up to her, but she'd forgotten. Some of us have spent our lives standing up to people who abuse power. And in the end, Karen wasn't prepared for the consequences of crossing someone who knew exactly how justice worked. And justice, it doesn't come in HOA notices. 2 weeks passed, you'd think the dust would have settled, but this wasn't just a petty HOA dispute anymore. Karen was under investigation, her every move watched, and her empire of power slowly collapsing. Her usual morning routine, walking her dog with exaggerated pride, making judgmental glances at trash bins, had vanished. She stayed inside, curtains drawn, SUV gone, but people were talking. Rumors spread like wildfire. Some claimed she had hired a private investigator to dig into my past. Others said she was trying to sue the tow company to shift blame. None of it shocked me. Karen was a control freak. She'd do anything to stay on top even while sinking. But one morning, as I prepared for a classified field check, something odd happened. A black SUV, not hers, rolled slowly through the neighborhood. Dark-tinted windows, government plates. It parked near her house. 2 men in suits got out and walked up to her front door this time, no knock. They walked right in. I knew then this wasn't just about towing my Jeep anymore. This was about something deeper, something Karen had either touched, opened, or exposed, and now federal intelligence was involved. She didn't just interfere with police equipment. She may have compromised an active national operation. Hours later, I got a call from my superior. He was stern, brief. He told me a piece of sensitive surveillance equipment had gone missing, something hidden in the Jeep's undercarriage. Not a weapon, but a device we'd been using to trace signals tied to an organized cybercrime ring. It was crucial, and it had vanished the day Karen had it towed. We were operating under the assumption she didn't even know it existed. But if that device had been moved, damaged, or worse, copied, it wasn't just a neighborhood problem anymore. It was a breach. I was told not to confront her directly. Instead, I monitored from a distance, eyes open, ears sharper than ever. Then came the bombshell. The tow truck company, under legal pressure, released footage of the entire process, including Karen arriving on scene, unlocking my gate, and opening the rear compartment of the Jeep. She was smiling, talking on the phone, and then she pulled something out of the back and stuffed it into her oversized designer purse. We froze the frame. There it was, the device, confirmed, identified, and removed by her hands. That changed everything. The charges escalated. No longer just trespassing or vandalism, now we were looking at federal theft and interference with a surveillance operation. A grand jury subpoena followed. She tried to play innocent, claimed she thought it was a weird radio part, that she just wanted to clean up trash. Her lawyer begged for leniency, but the DOJ wasn't playing games. Meanwhile, inside the neighborhood, the HOA board fractured. 2 members resigned. One fled the country for a vacation the same week subpoenas were served. It became clear Karen wasn't the only one abusing power. She had looped others in, promising influence and perks as long as they enforced her agenda. Her web was larger than I thought, and now it was unraveling, one by one. Then came the mailer, printed on glossy paper. It was dropped into every mailbox in the neighborhood. No return address, no signature. But inside was a timeline fully documented of Karen's abuse of power over the past 2 years. Every unjust citation, every targeted harassment against certain families, every misuse of HOA funds. It was explosive. There were screenshots of messages, audio clips from board meetings, and even photos of fines being waived for her friends while others were punished for having a faded mailbox. The community erupted. An emergency town meeting was called, not by the HOA, but by the residents. They filled the community center, voices loud, faces furious. People spoke up who had never said a word before. A single mom explained how she was fined for leaving her stroller on the porch. An elderly couple revealed how Karen threatened them with legal action over a flower bed. It became clear she had ruled through fear, but now people were no longer afraid. I stood in the back, arms crossed, watching the fire she'd started finally burn through her lies. A vote was called for her removal, unanimous. The next day, a locksmith changed the locks to the HOA office. Her nameplate was removed, her authority gone, and then, finally, she was arrested. Not with a loud siren or flashing lights, but silently. A quiet knock, a conversation, then handcuffs, her face ashen, no camera flashes, just the weight of her choices pressing down. The neighbors watched from behind trees and porch rails, no one said a word. And I didn't feel triumphant. I felt justice, the kind that comes slow, but hits hard. Karen had crossed a line she didn't even understand, and the system she weaponized for control had now turned its sights on her. The Jeep recovered, the device intact, but the memory of what she did, the arrogance, the entitlement, the assumption that she was untouchable, that would never be forgotten. And just like that, the HOA Karen, who once ruled this block with an iron clipboard, disappeared. But the story isn't over yet, because what we discovered next shook all of us. 3 weeks had passed since Karen's quiet arrest. You'd think that would be the end. But this story had one more gear left. The kind you don't see coming. It started with a knock, not on my door but on the garage where I kept the Jeep. 2 agents, same suits, same hard stares. They said they needed to verify something. I led them in, heart steady. But when they opened the Jeep's panel, the compartment where the device had been hidden, they didn't look relieved. They looked concerned. They made a call, whispered, took pictures, and then asked me one chilling question. When was the last time this vehicle was parked? Overnight? Anywhere near the community clubhouse? That question hit like a steel rod to the spine. Turns out, the device Karen had snatched wasn't just a passive tracker. It was a signal interceptor, a prototype we were testing, and while it was in her possession, it had picked up something no one expected, not from outside the community, but from within. A signal encrypted bouncing from the HOA central server to a remote server overseas. It had nothing to do with community finances or bylaws. It was data, sensitive data, real estate transactions, DMV logs, personal information being pulled, stolen. The HOA wasn't just an abusive power structure, it had become a laundering funnel for a broader cybercrime ring. And Karen, she may have just stumbled into the middle of it without realizing it. Or worse, maybe she did realize it. Now the agents weren't just asking questions. They were seizing equipment, computers, servers, hard drives from the HOA office and from one board member's garage. Subpoenas started flying again. This time the story made the news, local first, then national. Neighborhood HOA at the center of international data theft ring. Karen's face blurred in the background. My name wasn't mentioned, but I was in every frame, the one who exposed it all. The resident who refused to be bullied. Soon after, I got an official commendation, not public, but real, from my agency, for unintentional exposure of active digital crime operations through protected asset retrieval. It sounded like legal code for, you got lucky but you got it done. I didn't care about the wording. I cared about the outcome. The HOA was dissolved entirely. New management company came in, vetted, transparent, the old bylaws thrown out. The community began rebuilding not just fences and flower beds, but trust. People who once whispered now shared meals. Neighbors I'd never spoken to stopped to say thanks. The petty power games were over, for now. As for Karen, she faced multiple charges: federal theft, obstruction, interference, but during questioning, something strange happened. She flipped, gave up names, accounts, showed them where the money had gone. She wasn't the mastermind, she was the gatekeeper, a pawn wrapped in Prada. When the dust settled, she took a plea deal. 5 years minimum, no HOA, no luxury SUV, just silence. I didn't go to the sentencing, didn't need to. My Jeep was back, my gate locked, and the neighborhood finally quiet. But sometimes at night, I still hear that sound, the rattle of a lock being clipped, the grind of tires rolling across gravel, the soft arrogance of someone who thinks rules don't apply to them. And I remember that even the smallest action like cutting a lock can tear the lid off something far bigger than anyone expected. So next time someone asks me about HOA drama, I just smile, because they have no idea. They say karma has a strange way of arriving, sometimes slow, sometimes swift, but always on time. And for Karen, the HOA tyrant who thought she owned the world, her clock had just started ticking loudly. The morning after her arrest, a cold hush blanketed the neighborhood. No HOA patrols, no loud emails, no barking orders. The community that had lived under her thumb for years was finally free. People stood in their driveways talking again, waving, even smiling, something we hadn't done in months. Even old Mrs. Henderson across the street, who hadn't spoken to anyone since Karen ticketed her for unsightly hedges, was out in her garden humming. But I knew better than to think Karen was done. 2 days later, a county tow truck arrived, not for my Jeep, but for Karen's SUV, still parked in the HOA office spot. A smug young deputy handed her a printed order from the sheriff's office. Seems that when you're caught tampering with a police vehicle, you don't just lose your temporary seat on the board, you lose your license and your car. Karen stood there, red-faced, arms crossed in front of a growing audience of neighbors. The deputy politely tipped his hat. "County property now, ma'am. You can argue with the judge." She looked around for backup, but there was none. The entire HOA board had resigned one by one after the scandal hit local news. Turns out, Karen had kept them in the dark about the confiscated Jeep and the police fallout. Nobody wanted to share her sinking ship. Not even Greg, her lapdog secretary, who once fined me for parking one tire on my lawn. I thought it was over, but Karen wasn't done. Not by a long shot. A week later, my security cameras caught something strange around 2 a.m. A hooded figure sneaking into my driveway. They tiptoed across the gravel, holding something metallic in hand, a bolt cutter. But this wasn't a rookie thief. This was Karen, trying to cut through my NEW lock again. Only this time, the moment the cutters touched the chain, floodlights snapped on, sirens screamed, and out of nowhere, my police task force buddies stepped from the shadows, guns drawn and badges shining. "Freeze, Karen," she did, hands in the air, tears welling up. "You've got to be kidding me," she yelled. "This is harassment." But it wasn't. It was trespassing and a parole violation. Apparently, after a previous charge, the court had ordered her to stay 300 feet away from my property. They cuffed her right there, barefoot and in pajamas, and hauled her off, again. Now, this time the consequences stuck. She spent 90 days in county jail. When she got out, the HOA was long gone disbanded and replaced with a community council of actual residents. Real people, fair people. I was asked to serve on it, but I declined. You see, I didn't want power. I just wanted peace. A chance to park my Jeep without drama. A chance to sit on my porch and watch the sunset, knowing no one was going to find me for the wrong shade of mulch. As for Karen, last I heard, she moved 3 towns over, working a desk job at a storage unit company, the kind where she has to wear a visitor badge and answer to someone else. Poetic, isn't it? Sometimes justice isn't loud. It doesn't always wear a cape or make a scene. Sometimes it just parks a black Jeep in your driveway and waits, and I'll be here, watching, with the cameras on, and the keys in my hand, because this isn't just about HOA drama. It's about standing your ground, knowing your rights, and never letting a Karen with a clipboard walk all over you. Some scars don't show on the outside. Some live in your memory, in the sound of a snapped chain, in the echo of your name yelled across a lawn, in the passive-aggressive notes taped to your door. But after all that happened with Karen, my story had turned from bitter to legendary in the neighborhood. People stopped whispering, they started talking. It was strange at first, walking out to fetch my mail and having the elderly couple next door stop me just to say thank you. Not just for what I did, but for what it meant. For years, Karen had ruled the HOA like a mini-dictator, enforcing rules that no one remembered voting on, fining people for garden gnomes, barking dogs, unapproved curtains, and excessively wide mailboxes. My story had become their liberation too. Kids even started calling my Jeep the Freedom Truck. One of them drew it in chalk on the sidewalk with little sirens around it. I didn't correct them, I just smiled, but deep down, I knew things were fragile. We had peace now, yes, but there's always another Karen waiting to rise. Sure enough, during one of our first neighborhood meetings post-Karen, a man in a pressed golf shirt stood up. His name was Todd. He had a clipboard, and he had a vision for the neighborhood. He spoke with the same type of polished smile Karen once used, polite words loaded with suggestion. We should consider uniform fencing. We should revisit trash can placement. We should consider a curfew for backyard lighting. The room went quiet. I raised my hand. "Hey, Todd," I said, "you do realize what happened to the last person who tried to micromanage this neighborhood, right?" He laughed. "Oh, I've heard, but I'm not like her." People looked at me, waiting, so I stood up, walked to the projector, and played a clip. security footage, the moment Karen was caught trying to cut through my lock, her face, the cops, the cuffs, the chaos. I didn't say a word after that. I just turned back to Todd and said, "We don't need another vision. We need community." And that was that. No more clipboards, no more surprise rule changes. Instead, we got a garden club, a weekend movie night for families, a community page where we helped each other find lost pets and loan tools instead of tattling on weeds and driveways. The neighborhood changed, and I changed with it. As for the Jeep, well, it stayed. Of course it stayed, only now it wore its scars like armor. The new locks, the polished paint, the small badge sticker in the back window from the task force. A symbol, a reminder, and one day, something incredible happened. I came home to find a small box on my porch. No return address. Inside was a key, a patch, and a note. Officially cleared. You ever want to come back? Your seat's still warm. Captain Ray's. I stared at that note for a long time. Then at the key. And that night, under the stars, I started the Jeep. Drove it past the spot where Karen once stood, arms crossed, yelling about unauthorized parking. Past the place where she was cuffed. Past every house she once ruled over. Only this time it wasn't about revenge or proof. It was about freedom. Because sometimes standing up to tyranny doesn't just free you. It inspires everyone else to stop living in fear. And in this neighborhood, at least, fear had officially packed its bags. For now. Some people thought the drama ended when Karen was taken away in cuffs. They thought justice had a neat little bow on it. But anyone who's ever tangled with an HOA villain knows it's rarely the end. It's just a lull, because evil doesn't quit. It recruits. 3 weeks after Karen's final court date, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. No postage, no return address, just a single word typed on plain white paper, "Watch." Inside was a USB drive. Now I know what you're thinking. Don't plug it in. But curiosity, it's a strong drug. I used my old secure laptop, air-gapped, no Wi-Fi, booted it up, and opened the only file on the drive. It was video footage, blurry, surveillance style. It showed Karen in what looked like a diner, meeting with someone, a man, tall, thin, clean cut. But it wasn't Todd. They passed something across the table, a folder, and then 2 words caught on the hidden mic. "Get it back." I froze. Get what back? My Jeep, the documents, something more. Suddenly, this wasn't over. It was just beginning again. Later that week, a black SUV showed up outside my house. No plates, tinted windows. It just sat there, parked for hours. I approached. No one inside. The next day, someone broke into my backyard shed. Didn't steal anything, just left the door open. Let me know they were there, so I made a call. Captain Ray's answered on the first ring. "Yeah, we saw the footage," he said before I could even ask. Karen's trying to leverage some kind of deal. She knows things she shouldn't. And the man she met with, we know him. Deep connections. Not HOA level, government level. "You telling me this is national now?" He sighed. "I'm telling you to be careful." By now, this had gone beyond local drama. It was a chess game, one I didn't know I'd joined, and suddenly, my neighborhood looked like a different place. The joggers might be tails. The Amazon driver lingered too long. Drones buzzed more often overhead. I took precautions, moved sensitive files, strengthened the locks, again, and one night, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened the secret compartment in the Jeep, the one even Karen didn't find. Inside it was a small metal case, thumbprint, locked military grade. Inside that case, the original footage, the real one. From the sting, not the edited version Karen saw, the one that showed what really happened during that operation. And who was there? There was more to that night than just a stolen Jeep. There was evidence that tied certain HOA board members, not just Karen, to a side hustle involving vehicle tracking, property fraud, and access to restricted systems. They weren't just enforcing rules. They were selling data, and Karen, she had figured it out too late, tried to grab my Jeep thinking it would be her key to leverage, but it wasn't leverage, it was a trap. She'd stepped on a landmine she couldn't see. And now, others were coming to finish what she started. But I had the evidence. The Jeep was no longer just a vehicle, it was proof, and if anyone wanted it back, They'd have to go through me. You'd think after everything, the stolen Jeep, the arrests, the shadowy footage, things would slow down. But paranoia has a way of keeping you sharp. Every creak in the floorboards, every flicker of a street lamp, made my instincts twitch, and I wasn't wrong. Because 2 nights after I relocked the evidence inside the Jeep's hidden vault, someone tried to steal it again. Only this time they weren't amateurs. It was 2:34 a.m. The security system chimed softly, not the normal front door ping. This was the perimeter breach alert from the garage. I watched on the monitor as 2 figures in tactical gear approached silently. They weren't HOA wannabes. They moved like they'd done this before. Black outfits, face masks, no hesitation. They bypassed the outside keypad in seconds, cutting wires, rerouting power, slick, professional, efficient, but they didn't know I'd added a second layer inside, not wired, not connected, just analog, old school chains, and a pressure plate under the Jeep's tires. The moment they tried to lift the Jeep hood, boom, a flashbang fired from the ceiling rig. A temporary blind, then, I dropped from the rafters with a steel baton in hand, landing between them and the Jeep. Wrong house, boys, I said. They were stunned, but not for long. One lunged and I countered, cracking his shoulder. The other drew what looked like a taser. I kicked it out of his hand. The scuffle wasn't elegant, but it was loud enough for the neighborhood to wake, and for the police to show up. The 2 intruders bolted when sirens echoed down the street, leaving behind only boot prints and 1 dropped comm device. Later, the police handed the earpiece to Captain Reyes. He examined it, sighed, and looked me dead in the eye. "You're on someone's list now," he said. "This isn't HOA drama anymore." And that's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to just react anymore. I was going on the offensive. Using the drive I recovered from the intruders, I traced encrypted pings to a location outside state lines, an abandoned HOA training center that was shut down years ago. It had since been repurposed by former board members and, according to digital logs, some shady private contractors. I prepped the Jeep, no longer just a vehicle but a mobile fortress, reinforced body, drone launch hatch, license plate scrambler, and my old tactical vest fitted in the back. I wasn't just going for a visit. I was going to expose everything. By the time I crossed the state border, the rain was pouring and my pulse was steady. This wasn't revenge. It was closure. But little did I know, someone was already waiting for me inside. And it wasn't Karen. I knew I was being watched the second I stepped into the crumbling ruins of the old HOA training facility. The place was eerily quiet, too quiet. Broken glass crunched under my boots. Faded banners still hung from the ceiling, reading "Accountability starts with authority." Irony had aged them well. I followed the signal from the comm device left behind by the attackers. The tracker led me through a cracked corridor, down rusting stairs, into the sub-basement. The smell of mildew, dust, and old secrets filled the air. Then, click, a red laser dot landed on my chest. I froze. Another light blinked on. Then another. I was surrounded. At least 5 figures in blackout gear, rifles aimed, voices silent. My hands rose slowly, but just before things escalated, a 6th figure emerged from the shadows. Not Karen. It was Troy, the former HOA president, fired 3 years ago after a whistleblower exposed his embezzlement scheme. I'd heard he vanished. Apparently he hadn't vanished. He'd gone underground. "You shouldn't have come here," he said coolly. "This was supposed to stay buried." I studied him, same slicked back hair, same smug grin. But his eyes had changed. They were harder, emptier. This wasn't just HOA drama anymore. It was something else. "What do you want with my Jeep?" I asked. He laughed. "You still don't get it. That Jeep's not just yours. It was seized years ago during a federal sting. You just happened to buy it through a cleaned auction. Problem is, there's a drive hidden in the chassis, with names, accounts, dirty money, and some very high-level people want it gone." I stood in silence. That explained the attack, the surveillance, Karen being a pawn. Troy was pulling the strings, and now he was threatening to disappear me, but I had one last move. Earlier that day, I'd activated a failsafe. The Jeep's onboard dashcam had been streaming everything since I left home, through a secure satellite link to Reyes and his task force, audio, video, GPS, everything, and I had just said the magic words. Drive hidden in the chassis, dirty money, very high-level people. Reyes had it all. Troy must have known, because as I slowly backed toward a wall, his radio crackled. "This is U.S. Federal Task Force Charlie 9. The building is surrounded. Lay down your weapons and exit slowly." Chaos broke out. The armed men bolted. One tried to grab me, but I slammed him into a rusted locker. Lights flashed, sirens wailed, and just like that, this underground fortress became a trap for them. Minutes later, Reyes himself burst in, flanked by officers in tactical gear. "You all right?" he asked. I nodded. We walked out side by side, leaving Troy and his crew in cuffs, finally exposed to the world. Outside, the rain had stopped. The sky had cracked open into soft gold light. My Jeep Bullet, scratched but still standing, waited loyally at the edge of the cracked parking lot. As I climbed in, Reyes gave a nod. "You ever think of joining the force?" I smirked. "Nah," I said. "I prefer my HOA drama the old-fashioned way." We both laughed. Then I turned the key, engine rumbling, tires kicking up gravel as I rolled out of that haunted place, finally free. But as the horizon opened in front of me, I had a feeling. This wasn't the last HOA Karen I'd face. Not by a long shot. You'd think after a federal takedown, I'd get some peace. But in an HOA war zone, quiet usually means something worse is coming. A week passed since Reyes raided the facility. Troy and his cronies were in custody. The Jeep was inspected, cleared, and returned to me with a new set of federal grade tracking and armor updates. Apparently, the government wasn't ready to let it out of sight. Neither was I. But what really lingered wasn't the adrenaline or the violence. It was the question, how deep does this go? Karen had gone radio silent. No HOA meetings. No porch patrols. Not even a complaint slip in a mailbox. That wasn't like her. If Karen wasn't raising hell, she was plotting it. Then came the anonymous letter. No return address, no stamp. Just slipped under my door like a ghost. Not over. She has the ledger. They want the Jeep again. Watch the mayor. The mayor. Mayor Douglas Hastings, slick, smiling, the face of revitalization in our neighborhood. But now it made sense. He was HOA royalty in disguise. He'd been quietly feeding money to the association, hiding behind grants and permits. And the ledger, that meant Karen wasn't done. She had evidence, blackmail, insurance, or worse. I took it straight to Reyes. His face darkened. We suspected Hastings was involved. But if Karen has that ledger and she's gone rogue, then we've got a political weapon in the hands of a suburban terrorist. I finished. That night, I drove the Jeep into the heart of the city, through side streets and alleyways, to the edge of a condemned warehouse district. The perfect place for secrets. I found Karen. She was waiting on a rooftop like a villain out of an old noir film, leather gloves, hair tied tight, and in her hand, a silver briefcase. "The ledger, I warned you," she said, eyes narrowing. "You could have walked away. And you could have stuck to garden gnomes and noise complaints." I snapped. She opened the case. Inside were files. Not just HOA stuff, government contracts, bribes, recorded calls, even images of hidden bank accounts tied to the mayor's office. This was no longer just HOA corruption. This was a citywide conspiracy, and Karen, she wanted to sell it to the highest bidder. "Give me the Jeep," she demanded, fully upgraded with the drive restored. "You do that, I vanish. This disappears forever." I couldn't let her go. But I couldn't act alone, so I stalled. "What makes you think I'd trust you?" "I don't need your trust," she said, stepping back. "I just need your silence." That's when the rooftop lights flared on. Reyes appeared behind the skylight, weapon drawn. Helicopter blades roared in the distance. She was surrounded, but Karen was ready. She leapt to the fire escape, slid down like a pro, and vanished into the alleys. We searched for hours. She was gone, again, but the briefcase still there. The city's corruption was exposed. Mayor Hastings resigned within 72 hours. A special task force dismantled the HOA and froze its assets. Reyes called me the next day. "She'll be back," he said. "Let her." I replied, because now I knew the truth. This wasn't just about one Jeep or one HOA. This was about power, control, secrets, and those willing to protect them, at any cost. Karen had played her part like a queen in a suburban chess match. But I wasn't a pawn anymore, and if she came back, I'd be ready.